In the 1960s, a young zoologist named Patricia Woolley was collecting small mammals in the forests of southeastern Australia when she noticed something odd. The mouse-like creatures that she had been trapping all winter had seemingly vanished out of thin air. Well, to be more exact, the males had. But the question is, why? At first glance, you might think disease, or maybe poison, or perhaps they simply up and left. But when she captured a number of males the next year, she found something that would reshape her understanding of mammalian reproduction forever. These animals hadn't left, and they hadn't died from predation or even pathogens. What killed them was sex, or more accurately, from a hormonal cascade so extreme that it literally destroys their organs and kills them from the inside out. Welcome to the world of Antechinus, a genus of marsupials that has spent millions of years perfecting the art of reproductive suicide. At first glance, an Antechinus might look somewhat unremarkable, essentially looking like a mouse, just if said mouse had the bristly fur of a shrew and the swagger of something that knows it's related to Tasmanian devils rather than a timid rodent. And as a whole, the genus ranges in size from about 16 to 170 grams, depending on the species, and making the largest males about as heavy as a baseball. But comparing an Antechinus to a mouse is like comparing a Formula 1 car to a go-kart. These little guys are no scavengers or even omnivores, but rather obligate carnivores, just like a lion or a tiger. And while they may not have the size of their feline counterparts, they do come equipped with sharp, specialized teeth that can slice through insect exoskeletons like surgical scalpels. And they certainly put said scalpels to good use, essentially hunting with all the intensity of a tiny tiger, which makes a lot of sense considering that they need to consume up to 60% of their body weight a day just to survive. And because these guys are so formidable, relatively speaking, it might not be surprising to hear that the genus emerged during the beginning of Australia's Great Dying, approximately 10 million years ago, when the continent transformed from a lush paradise into the sunburned forsaken country that we know of today. And as the climate broke up the rainforests, Antechinus populations became isolated, eventually evolving to the 15 species we recognize today. And each species has carved out its niche with the surgical precision fitting of its teeth. Antechinus stewarti dominates the forests of the east coast, while Antechinus flavipes has claimed the south, ranging from southeastern Australia to the far southwest margins. And meanwhile, the silver-headed Antechinus lives only in 3 isolated parts of Queensland, and so it goes. So in other words, they pretty much diversified across every forest type in Australia, from tropical rainforests where the humidity makes you question your life decisions, to the temperate forests of Tasmania where winters actually mean something. But regardless of geography, they all share one trait that makes them next to unique among Earth's 6,600 mammalian species. And that is the fact that the males are programmed to die. And here is where Antechinus biology goes from somewhat interesting to what in the HE double hockey stick. You see, as winter transitions to spring in the southern hemisphere, Antechinuses begin detecting something so subtle that we need modern technology to measure it. And that is the daily change in daylight duration. Now, to be clear, I am not referring to total amount of daylight, but rather the rate of change. And this rate of change leads to a transformation that ultimately spells both their species' future and their own doom. And that is the transformation from a little rodent-looking marsupial to what is essentially a combination of a sex fiend and a zombie. And this is quite the event, because not only is it the first time they'll get laid, but also the only time, as after this brief period, the males are no more. And interestingly, the trigger is different for each species, with Antechinus stewarti beginning their transformation when days lengthen by 97 to 117 seconds daily, while their cousins, Antechinus agilis, wait for 127 to 137 seconds. And the precision is so exact that males from all over the country will begin the change within a very short period of each other, synchronized by nothing more than the Earth's rotation. So in other words, we're talking about mouse-sized creatures detecting daylight changes of less than 2 minutes, and then using that to coordinate the most precisely timed mass death in nature. And like I mentioned, once triggered, the transformation is irreversible. And let's just say, this process certainly isn't pretty. First off, males will immediately abandon their territories, starting to disperse looking for their female counterparts. And it seems that abandoning their home also leads to an abandonment of any form of common sense, as they essentially give up both food and sleep in return for the prospect of getting some. And while in humans this would spell a massive drop in testosterone levels, the same cannot be said for the Antechinus, which for them basically serves as a trenbolone sandwich, with their test levels exploding to 8 times the normal amount. But here's the kicker. While their testosterone is spiking, their sperm production is absolutely zero, which might seem confusing at first glance, considering they're pretty much prepping for a sexual marathon of their lifetime, literally. But it makes more sense when you realize that they've actually already produced all the sperm they need weeks ago, essentially carrying their entire lifetime supply of genetic material, preloaded and ready to go. And that's important because their bodies are about to lose the ability to produce anything but essentially sex and death hormones. Now, unsurprisingly, shooting your testosterone up to 8 times the normal amount results in some changes, which turn out to be pretty grotesque ones at that. Males bulk up a massive amount in just a short period of time, but while their muscles are swelling, their fur begins to thin, falling out in literal patches. And then the sternal glands, which are scent factories in the chest, which are normally barely visible, balloon into big, greasy patches that pump out massive amounts of pheromones consisting of acetic acid, short-chain aldehydes, and long-chain hydrocarbons, which combined make a compound that can probably only be described as a smell between musk and death, which wouldn't be my personal choice for a clone, but hey, each to their own. And to get ready for mating, even their genitals will transform, essentially becoming permanently erect, which then combined with specialized structures that serve as copulation locks, allow for snoo-snoo sessions that last for hours long. And in case you don't know what a copulation lock is, well, that might be for the best. And when they find their less stinky counterparts and the quote-unquote fun begins, the word frenzy barely captures the phenomena. You see, this isn't a brief apologetic courting of lovers, but rather closer to what one might call a cult-like ritual, with males mating for 5 to 14 hours continuously. Not multiple sessions, just one unbroken marathon. And so unsurprisingly, both genders are suffering here, and the males especially really like to lay it on, literally, with them gripping females by the neck with a strong bite and then just going at it. So if you thought hickeys were bad, think again. And so with said marathons, you probably won't be shocked to hear that they burn energy like a diesel truck, needing drastically more calories just to maintain basic life functions. But of course, who's got time for hunting when you've only got one shot at getting laid, with them instead literally burning their own bodies for fuel. And so within days, the forest becomes what basically looks like a horror movie set, with males stumbling through the underbrush as their coordination fails due to their eyes malfunctioning. And they're also covered in wounds from fights with other males, and perhaps from an unwilling female or two. And these wounds don't heal, or rather, can't heal, with the biological machinery for repair having been effectively shut off. And by the second week, they have transformed to look like extras from a zombie film, if said zombie extras were also trying to mate with everything that moved. Patches of fur fall out, leaving only raw skin behind. Their eyes cloud over as they become damaged and sometimes blind. And some males have been found attempting to mate while having gangrenous infected wounds. Yet they continue until they no longer breathe. And now this probably is scaring you from ever attempting a similar marathon. And the mechanism of death and damage reads somewhat like a medical horror story. You see, while the testosterone initiates the process, the real killer is actually cortisol, a stress hormone that in normal amounts helps you deal with challenges. But in the male Antechinus, it becomes a chemical weapon turned against their own body. As their testosterone continues to rise, it causes corticosteroid-binding globulin to crash. And this is a problem, as CBG normally keeps cortisol in check, like a safety valve on a pressure cooker. So without it, free cortisol floods every tissue. And in any other mammal, the brain would detect these lethal levels and shut down production. But in Antechinus, the feedback loop is broken, and deliberately by evolution at that. Cortisol levels rise from 100 nanomoles per liter to over 1,000. A tenfold increase that, if happened in humans, would push them into a metabolic crisis. The hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis, or HPA for short, becomes locked in what could only be called a death spiral, pumping out more and more stress hormones even as organs break down under the assault. And within 3 weeks of this transformation occurring and the mating season starting, every single male is dead. A mass death event that occurs with nuclear precision year after year, and for millions of years at that. Now at this point, you're probably thinking, why in the world would this happen? I mean, evolution favors survival of the fittest after all. Emphasis on the survival part. And this is true, natural selection certainly favors the fittest. But fittest means the one who can have the most kids. And normally this would mean surviving multiple breeding seasons, not just one. I mean, to be honest, from an evolutionary standpoint, the whole point of staying alive is literally so that you can breed again. And so this all begs the question of how did this suicidal system evolve? And the answer lies in Australia's boom-bust ecology. Unlike the predictable seasons of other continents, Australian forests experience dramatic pulses of productivity. Insects, the Antechinus' main food source, explode in population for just weeks, and then crash to the ground, basically causing a feast or famine situation with no middle ground. And so for a small insectivorous mammal, this creates an almost impossible puzzle. How do you time reproduction so that babies are born exactly when insects peak? And how do you avoid adults competing with their own offspring for scarce food during bust periods? And the Antechinus solution is brutal elegance. Just kill off half the population immediately after mating. And by using photoperiod as an invariable trigger, they ensure offspring are born precisely when food peaks, while at the same time removing all adult males from the ecosystem, guaranteeing food on both fronts. But now you might be thinking, why only males? And besides from the whole fact that of course the females need to raise the children, you also need to understand that female Antechinuses are polyandrous, meaning they mate with multiple males across the breeding season. And this creates a situation of intense sperm competition, where quantity matters just as much as quality. And so males who mate more times with more females father more offspring, which in turn means that any male who quotes-unquote paces himself, saving energy for that pesky survival, gets genetically obliterated by males who go all out. And over millions of years, this pressure created increasingly extreme adaptations. For instance, their testicles are massive for their size, and then on top of that, even the sperm itself is oversized, being about 270 micrometers long, which is absurdly large for mammals, being about 5 times longer than a human's. And then of course there's the ability to, mate half a day straight. And every adaptation pushed them closer to the physiological breaking point. The hormone resistance that lets them mate for weeks without dying is selected by evolution. Males who could tolerate higher hormone levels could mate longer. But of course at the same time, these same adaptations spelled their doom. Essentially self-selecting become single-use biological cruise missiles aimed at reproduction. But while the males are keeling over in their 3-week sex marathon, the females aren't exactly off scot-free, facing their own set of challenges. After a pregnancy which lasts for only 25 to 35 days, they give birth to what barely can be called babies. So imagine a pink rice grain with stubby limbs and a mouth, and then imagine 6 to 12 of them, blind, hairless, being essentially fetuses that just happen to be outside of the womb. And the race for survival begins immediately. Mother Dearest has between 6 and 13 nipples, but she often births more young than she has teats, which means the babies essentially play a game of musical chairs, just with the fact where losing means death, as the joeys that don't attach within minutes will simply die. And for the survivors, it's the start of one of the most energetically demanding childhoods in the mammalian world. As the young develop, the mother's milk changes in composition, starting from a carbohydrate-rich composition to support early growth, but then gradually shifting to higher fat and protein levels to fuel their increasing demands. And by the late lactation period, the mother's energy use skyrockets. In some species, she'll burn more than 1.5 times her usual metabolic budget, just producing milk, which to put that into human terms would be like burning 2,000 calories just breastfeeding. But this is where the species genius really starts to shine, as prior to lactating, and then afterwards, Antechinuses will enter a state called torpor, which is where they basically will drop their body temperature by 20 degrees Celsius or more, which allows them to heavily reduce their metabolic rate and helping them save energy for when they need it. And it is actually this whole mechanism that also makes the Antechinus survival experts. Well, besides the whole mass die-off part, as this mechanism is used throughout their life to help conserve energy when not foraging, and in situations of profound food loss, like bushfires, which as you know, are unfortunately quite common in good old Australia. In fact, they're so well adapted to survive bushfires that even the presence of smoke and leftover charcoal on the ground can serve as a cue for them to enter this state. And that also helps that they're not exactly picky when it comes to their source of meat, be it insects, small vertebrates, and even their own kind, with some male Antechinuses even having been observed eating their death by snoo-snoo comrades. And while these guys are survival experts, their finely tuned death machine, which has worked perfectly for 10 million years, is now under threat. And who's the threat? Well, us. Remember, this entire cycle depends on predictable timing, photoperiod triggering breeding exactly when insects boom. And while photoperiod is what triggers Antechinus, it is temperature, not daylight, that drives insect populations. So climate change is resulting in a shock to the system, to say the least. And then when you combine that with both habitat destruction and invasive species, well, let's just say it's not a great combo. I mean, the black-tailed Antechinus was only discovered in 2014, and there's a reason for that. The reason being that it's already endangered. And while we are taking steps to help preserve Antechinus, conservation becomes especially nightmarish when half your species is programmed to die annually. And even in comfortable cages with unlimited food, males will still die on schedule. The death program cannot be overridden. But hey, at least for now they live, and serve as a perfect reminder that evolution does not care about individual survival. It doesn't care about suffering, dignity, or whether a strategy seems reasonable or crazy. It just cares about one thing: do genes make it to the next generation? And by that metric, every male Antechinus that collapses in the Australian forest has won. His genes continue in the joeys his death serves to create. And in some ways, maybe he should be given the Dad of the Year award, as he's literally removed himself as competition, donating his nutrients back to the ecosystem and ensuring his offspring will wean during peak food availability. So the next time you think life isn't fair, just remember in the forests of Australia, as spring arrives and days lengthen by just 97 seconds, the death clock for these little fuzzy guys starts ticking. Males that were once cautious hunters become hormone-crazed mating machines, and within 3 weeks, all will be dead. And next year, their sons will do exactly the same thing, repeating a cycle that's been going on for millions upon millions of years. Thanks for watching, and until next time on Living Zoo.